The first 3 weeks of the eruption here in Hawaii, crazy things would happen in the middle of the night. A new fissure would open up and it would threaten a new neighborhood. Thousands of people are evacuated from their homes. I started the Hawaii Tracker Facebook group to help people understand what's going on and get their questions answered.
Hey, how's it going? We're live. This is Fissure 20.
We had hundreds of people all throughout the neighborhoods sending in videos, articles, and images. We spend a lot of time making sure the accurate information gets out.
This is live. There's still lava moving.
They weren't just sharing a story, they were helping their neighbor. If a family was being evacuated, my group would just jump in and help out. So it was huge. They were watching out for each other.
Hello everybody, thank you for coming. Thank you for the support from everybody.
As we go through this, we're growing closer together as a community. When tragedies like this strike, you really realize how much you need each other.
Aloha everyone, I am geologist Philip Ong here with Mr. Dane DuPont, HawaiiTracker.com, bringing you guys a Maunaloa update today, Friday, April 30th, 2021. The activity in Maunaloa in brief has quieted down a little bit from last week. There's not a whole lot going on. We had a pattern of earthquakes, but that has shifted a little bit. We'll go into a little bit of the details. And then we're going to give you guys a history, a little bit of the biggest lava lake that's been documented on Maunaloa. History isn't super long. There haven't been a huge amount of eruptions that qualify, but we'll go into all of that and show you guys a little bit of what there is. Just to kind of tease you a little bit, since a lot of it's going to be building on later on with more information about Maunaloa eruptions. So we do have a little bit of video from back in the 1930s. We're going to show you guys a couple little clips as well, so stay tuned for that here at the end. But we'll start off with this webcam view of Maunaloa here. And as we go through these first monitoring signals and webcam images, Dane will be looking for questions in the streams and answering questions in the chat, and we'll get to some questions here at the end of our broadcast. Try to discuss what we can to the best of our ability. So starting off here, this is a view of Maunaloa today, 30 minutes ago or so. Nice clear skies up there. Not a whole lot of snow anymore. Everything's pretty quiet. The main USGS page here does have a thermal camera as well. You don't trust the other one, and our maximum value over here on the right of it is 35 degrees Celsius or so. So that is still normal and nothing really to be alarmed about over there. So scale right over here, top right side. All right, so let's move on to the signals. Let's start off with, let's scroll up here to the top of the page. This is Maunaloa tilt deformation page, which is tilt and GPS. At the top we have the GPS for the past week, and these are aligned typically so that the blue line is the one facing towards the main magma chamber, the main magma inflation area. So that in the last week it's been pretty flat here. Something interesting happening with the green, but it's not quite clear what's going on there. Yeah. If we look at the past month, maybe it's a little clearer because we can see that maybe we have a little bit of a decline here, very slight downward slope here over the last week or so, last half a week. And prior to that, a little bit more flat. And if I scroll back earlier in the month, you can see we had that the tail end of last month when we had the larger contraction event across the summit, and a tilt at the same time that followed after those series of earthquakes. After that, shallow summit deflation. We believe the tilt meters are only sensitive to fairly shallow depths, and Maunaloa is tricky because it has some deeper systems that maybe this is not quite as sensitive to. But in any case, it dropped down and then recovered a bit, and maybe is slightly dropping down. So it just shows that it's in a period of adjustment. If we are picking up a true signal there, it's not quite clear, and we might have a higher noise to signal ratio here because of that distance to the magma reservoir. But still, we can try to start watching the tilt here and see what we can see. And all it's telling us is adjustments still happening. As far as the GPS, maybe a little bit more interesting because this distance from north to south across the summit caldera, that went through that big contraction recently and then resumed last week to a slow extension. If we zoom in here, we can maybe see that over the last week we appear to actually have been resuming a slower contraction again. So there's a lot of caveats, you know, as far as we've said them before, I'll say them again now, that it's hard to read the data on the right end of this plot. There might be some error correction that comes in after the fact, that the data appears to sometimes tighten or be improved. So it's hard to really take major conclusions from this right hand of the graph, but that's all we have to look at here. And maybe, you know, we're not seeing a trend of it going straight up again, right? It's not doing that, and it doesn't seem to be containing its previous track either. So either it may be staying the same or possibly starting to head down. We'll have to wait and see how that develops there. So that was part of the cycle we've described before about how magma comes into the upper parts of the volcano and to the middle of the volcano, and then it spreads out to the side, and then it comes into the top and spreads out. And every time it spreads out, the summit might contract at the top, even as a base spreads apart. And maybe that's the pattern we're seeing here. And the little bit of evidence we have for that is if we turn to our earthquakes after we read a USGS update here. Just want to make sure we touch base with the authorities here. All its data, all these webcams come from USGS HVO, and they're noting 150 magnitude earthquakes beneath the summit and upper elevation flanks, all less than magnitude 3 and all fairly shallow. So that's the same as before. And there's really not a whole lot in there. There's no increased hazard at this time. So nothing really there. So the changes really are very subtle. If we come here to the earthquake map, and we try to look at the earthquakes, we can see there's less of them around that summit region, but they are still happening in the past week here. And we still have Pahalas happening around, earthquakes happening around the Pahala area, mostly in this deep area. But there are a couple in here that just happened today, which are kind of sneaking in there in this range. There's a 3.2 at 0.6 kilometers depth, so very shallow, around sea level, and one at negative 0.4 kilometers, 3.0, a little doublet that happened this morning at 5:30 a.m. here local time. By Pahala. That's part of that south flank zone, and so Kilauea has a little bit of action, not really worth talking about, but since it's on a page, we'll just mention there's also quiet on Kilauea. So let's look at the earthquakes in a couple different ways here. Let's first go to, this is the USGS HVO monitoring page. If you click on monitoring, it'll take you to this map. And what I've done here is I've changed my settings, so I'm plotting by color by depth now. So these reds and maroons, these are shallow ones, right? So this is the edge of the magma chamber, not a whole lot going on there. The blue ones down here in a purple, that's the deep Pahala earthquakes. But this shows us that there are a couple of these reds in here, and those are the interesting ones, right? We have a couple of reds here, there's red and orange. Those are all the flank earthquakes, the red and oranges. So A little bit of flank activity over here in the southern Hilea section of the south flank of Mauna Loa, right? A lot, and really very quiet in a Kauiki section over here, which was active a lot in the previous months. So also we see a few here in the Kona side, over here in this Kona section, right? So the Kona section at similar depth of the south flank. It's interesting to me that if you were to draw a line between these ones and this one, pretty much perpendicular to the rift zone right in here, right? So possibly we're having some movement of magma in the deep rift zone somewhere in there, and that's causing that pushing apart of the south flank, and the volcano is able to spread in this direction here and here. So that's all good. There's no cause for alarm in itself. The volcano grows and spreads in lots of ways without erupting. And what we're concerned about as humans living on the surface, as islanders here, is its eruptions and being prepared for them and talking about them and understanding them a little bit better. And so there's no sign of anything coming up towards the surface there, right? It's really it's that same cycle of sprawling and filling and sprawling and filling and sprawling. And when it can't sprawl anymore, then that's when it can build pressure to then burst out at the summit first, and then after some progression to one of the rift zones, most likely. Okay, so that's the one way of looking at it here. Let's look at the earthquakes a little different way. Here's the last month at the summit of Mauna Loa, the automatic USGS page. And not a whole lot compared to the previous weeks in there. I can zoom it in, you probably can't even see anything on there, but they're still happening. Lots of small ones, but not nearly as many as before. Right? And the way we can tell that is if we move here to the plot that shows earthquake rates and depths for the past month, and now we have earthquakes per day here on the left, and we had that little cluster swarm of 70, and then there was one of 60 the previous 2 weeks. There was 1 week before that just went off the graph here over a month ago, and the last week it's been fairly quiet. This is adding up the earthquakes in that little plot at the summit. So really this is a summit earthquakes measure, and we can see that we've actually are back down below 20, and in fact around 10 earthquakes per day in that area, which is a lot less, obviously, than other times we've had recently. Right, so let's look at it one more way, and let's see if we can get some temporal action in here. So we're going to turn to the Iris earthquake browser, and now we're playing animation of just the last week here. So you can see at the beginning of the sequence, there's some earthquakes in this northwest of the Caldera region, but then we start to see hala earthquakes or flank earthquakes here, here, and here, kind of in sync, right? So it's kind of phase 1 of the week is up here, and phase 2 is here and here. And so it was feeling, it seemingly more the summit area was feeling more pressure, and then more recently in the week, pressure seems to be on the flanks down in here. Just minor details. It's nothing alarming, like I said. It's just interesting to try to pick apart all the little wiggles the volcano is doing, trying to adjust itself to the point where it finally will erupt someday, but there's no sign of that here yet. It's just the wiggling aspect of it. But it's interesting to see here. These last 2 magnitude 3s coming in here at the very end, right? All right. So for the last year, you can see that we have had increased activity quite a bit, but in the most recent months here, we've been tailing off. You gotta ignore this last one because it's an incomplete month here. But even just counting the one before that, you can see we're clearly coming down, and we're not yet, even in this current month, enough to reach these kind of levels. We're likely gonna end up somewhere in this range again by this look here. So really, it's been a downward trend in the past couple months. Even if we have had sporadic clusters of activity, it's overall been decreasing. I've said before, I'm not the biggest fan of this resolution because you're kind of clumping together a lot of the gaps and peaks all in ones, but that's the long-term pattern as you can see it over the past year here. Okay. So that is the earthquakes there. And one last thing to look at with the earthquakes here, and that is someone was asking last week about the harmonic tremor potential of the summit, right? And so here's a couple of recent seismographs from the summit. You can see that there is earthquake activity. All these little ink splotches, these little earthquakes happening. So these are all the small earthquakes we're seeing on the map. So they're happening. So, you know, this is background, right? This is that elevated background that we're seeing. So still, it's not entirely quiet. It's just quieter than it was before. And you might suspect that maybe this area of darker ink in here maybe is a candidate for some tremor, and it could be a little bit, or it could be something that's sensitive or, you know, very localized. What we're really interested in is something that's shaking the whole volcano. You know, in the days of Jagger, they would detect this tremor down at Kilauea. That's how much the ground would be shaking with harmonic tremor from eruptions in Maunaloa. So if we look, this is the southwest rim station, southwest rift and rim here. And one that's just in the southeast, or more in the south, that's a wild station. You can see similar earthquake patterns, signals in fact at the exact same times. And switch it back and forth. And what you see really is that we don't have a zone of tremor up in the rim here. So if there is any tremors localized, it's just a little bit here and there, and possibly that could be something to do with the wind, or it's hard to tell there. You know, you really want to see something that's not so sensitive that only one station is picking it up, more so that all the stations are picking it up, and we're not really seeing evidence of that here in all the stations, right? So something we can keep an eye on, and since it was asked last week, I thought I'd bring it up here this week. Now we're going to shift gears a little bit and address another question that came in last week. So I'm kind of answering a couple of last week's questions before we turn to this week's questions here. And the question was about, and I think we've had it the last few weeks, in fact, was about lava lakes in Mauna Loa. And so I started looking into lava lakes in Mauna Loa and try to see what there is that is shareable with you guys, right? And to kind of set the scene, we have to really go back to what Mauna Loa was like in the 1800s, and because the longest documented lava lake of Mauna Loa was in fact 148 years ago this month, April of 1873, an 18-month lava lake that was sustained on the summit of Mauna Loa. Is the longest one that we know of that's continuous. Now, you'll see from some of the accounts that we're going to share that people were not up there all the time, and sometimes it's really hard to tell if there's activity from Hilo or from the top of Mauna Kea if you're lucky to get a better view, those kind of things. So 18 months for sure, vigorous enough that with no doubt it was fountaining enough and filling the lake and lighting up the sky that it was confirmed from all around. And there were times people went up there. We'll read you the account of Isabella Bird here that they went up there and it seemed like there was no glow coming and they thought they wouldn't see anything, but they get up there and there's a giant lava lake in full effect. So quite likely it went on longer. The USGS notes that eruption might have lasted as long as 4.5 years of continuous level activity, not just those 18 months. So off and on, but I'm going to give it 18 months for the lava lake continuous activity. That's the most likely thing here. So 1841 was really the first survey of Mauna Loa, shown here by the Wilkes expedition, 1841. Mokua Ve'oveo is the summit crater. And what's interesting is that you have the central depressed pit in the middle in here with a flat floor, which likely means a recent lava flow, right? And you have a bench in the north, and then the north pit, and you have another bench in the south, and then the south pit. Some of these were called South Bay and North Bay back in the day, and it's not quite clear the whole thing or which part of it was going on here. Right, so, and you can see some northeast rift zone activity. Northeast rift zone connects up in here. The southwest rift connects down over in this direction over here. So they recognize the summit was on the western side of the caldera, and the easier ascent was on the eastern side, southeast side. So quite often people came and measured over here at Pendulum Peak or camped out on the southern, southeastern rim over here. All right, so now that we've had a look at Kilauea recently and seen that summit caldera collapse, we can recognize that these are all different elevation chunks of caldera collapse. Right? So we had some collapse that had a deeper middle in Mauna Loa, and as it was refilling, it was able to refill that bottom section first here. Right, but just like Kilauea has this down drop block, Mauna Loa has this down drop block here and here as well, still in 1841. And today, this is not visible anymore. This has all been buried by lava flows since this time. So Mauna Loa has certainly been in a caldera refilling phase, right? Refilling all the void from the collapse. And the collapse, best guess, 1,000 years ago or so. That's a story for a different day. That's on the collapse of Mauna Loa, but that's kind of the background here. That post-collapse, we've had refilling for a while, and we've only refilled this inner pit, right? And of course, there might have been multiple collapses, of course, and smaller collapses and bigger collapses, and that's all hard to tell. So we'll get back to that here a little later. So 1841. And what happens next in 1841, or essentially the biggest thing on Mauna Loa that's happened since people have been around, was the 1868 Great Pu'u earthquake, the 7.9 that moved the entire south flank, a massive, massive amount. Induced the 1868 Southwest Rift Zone eruption and led to a whole change in Mauna Loa's eruptions ever since then, right? That goes to show how important South Flank is to Mauna Loa, just like South Flank is to Kilauea. And just like we've been talking about Kilauea recovering from that 1975 Kalapana earthquake, right? That was also possibly a 7.9-ish in that range. That led to a sustained, long-lasting activity on Kilauea's East Rift Zone. And so Mauna Loa goes through a period of a lot of activity that works its way back up the Southwest Rift and essentially refills that whole summit, right? Whereas previous to that, there was an era of a lot more radial vents and other overflows. And anyways, that's also maybe a little getting out in the weeds there. So bring myself back in here to show you guys the next survey that was done in 1874 during the active lava lake, done by Lydgate. This is June 10th here. And so the same kind of view. You see that south pit and that downdrop block in the south, this northern downdrop block, and that northern pit. This pit looks different here. It looks quite a bit bigger, actually, right in here. And if you'll notice, I'll flip back, but you can notice this corner right in here. This is looking a little different too. This is like a game of spot the difference. Let's scroll this back down here. So very circular here in the southwest corner. In fact, I'll draw out. They include this little knob right in here, right? This is 1841, and then post-1841, post-1868, now that little knob that before went this way, it seems we've had some collapse in this area over here. And in fact, it's in this area that the lava comes back up and the lava lake forms, and so this is the main locus of a lot of activity for the next century on Mauna Loa, is out of this little corner down here on the bottom, right? But once again, notice this crater at the top. I'll go back, and not quite. You don't really see that extent over there, right, in fact. And in fact, we know that later in the sequence, in 1880s, and today there's a new a new pit crater that's more or less in here that was formed in the 1880s. So a lot of change in the topography in this northeast rift zone area as well. And so hard to know exactly how accurate these sketches are, but Lydgate was a surveyor, so it's inclined to believe this guy over a lot of the other guys, in fact, right? And in fact, he actually shows this little knob right in here. And then I'm going to show you guys a second sketch map here. And this one is from Hall, and I've got it sideways to start, just so I can emphasize he also has this little knob right in here, right? So these guys made a point to draw in this feature right in there. And we go back to 1841, and it's not there. It seems like it should go this way. And so we're trying to reconstruct here from very little information what might have happened. So 1868, maybe we had some Caldera collapse, additional pit craters, or any of the time in between then as well. Right. So, all right. So let's take this plot and put it the right way here, and show you guys a little bit of the configuration here. So Hall is drawn in the lake right over here. That's this little kidney bean section right in here. But there was actually another shelf down over here in this southern part of the crater as well. And he's showing the lake in a smaller area, but feeding overflows that cover this whole bottom part of the crater here. And so there's a couple of different ways to think about how lava flows in Mauna Loa can make lava lakes, and one is the fact that they're just filling a big hole in the ground, not unlike Kilauea is doing now. And you have an eruption in a big hole in the ground, it's going to fill it in, you can make a lava lake. And this one, whether you call this area over here flows that are crusting over, or it's part of a shallow lake, that's maybe a question of semantics. Because in the end, there ended up being somewhere like 45 feet of new lava covering the entire bottom of the pit here, right? But as far as an open surface, only a smaller open surface over here on one end of it, right? Which is interesting. It's not too dissimilar to what's happening in Kilauea now, with a small lake, in fact, also by the west, and a big crested over eastern part, right? That kind of struck me when I was looking at this here. A little bit of similarity of the look, right? So that's Hall's sketch there, and that's September 1873. So that's already 5 months into the eruption. And show you guys a different version of Lydgate's sketch here, and June 24th, 1874 is a date here. So he's noting on here where they camp, where the Wilkes group camped. So Pendulum Point somewhere around in here. And there is that lava lake right in there, right over here. He's got marked out that lower floor of the crater. So that's really that spot of action right there. So what I'd like to do is read you guys some of the historical accounts. I'm going to read you guys a little bit from Hitchcock, and one of the best ones is Isabella Bird, famous a traveler, the second woman to ascend Mauna Loa, with the help of I'm going to say four mules and 2 pack horses, and traveling companion geologist as well. So I put it back here to this map view here, and I'm going to read not just an excerpt of Isabella's account, but a little bit of what Hitchcock recaps as far as a history of this area, which really came back to life in 1868 after that eruption, which was actually fairly short. There was a less than a month eruption in 1871, and in 1872 in August there was a 2-month eruption. It was kind of building up. 1872 one was one that's worth reading. A slight recap here for you guys from Dr. Samuel Neeland. Right, and he talks about the observations here. And he says, from the center of a small cone with an apparent diameter of 200 feet sprang a jet of molten lava not less than 300 feet high and about 100 feet in diameter. There was an opening on the northeast side of the cone from which flowed a river of lava, which gradually widened into a broad lake. From the other end of the lake took its course along the base of the precipice, which separates the north from the south side of the crater. So, in fact, if I go back one sequence here, he's talking about something very similar to this site and a flow that's coming down along this bottom shelf, which still exists here in early 73 and 1972. The fiery fountain was a principal feature. Its roar was not unlike that of Niagara, but without the concussion and irregular booming sound of the Great Cataract. It's hard to conceive the energy of the forces which could keep this heavy molten column in perpetual suspension so many hundred feet high for several weeks. In the end, estimated maybe 60 days, 2 months or so of that eruption. And so a couple of other accounts still in 72, and comes back to action in 1973 in January, where the herdsmen at Ainapul describe the mountain, quote, constantly quivering like a boiling pot, right? There's a harmonic tremor. No instruments, but you have some ranchers living up in the high flanks of the volcano, ranching and reporting. So it was really April 20th that activity came to light in full force at the beginning of that 18-month sequence. And the first reports, park rangers, Reverend White, 150 feet, 300 feet high lava fountains out through the middle of there. And by the middle of June, it was Isabella Bird and W.L. Green. And this is the account I want to read a little bit more to you guys, that they were on their way up, saw no glow, no reflection, and they were, quote, fearful of being disappointed. But within 2 miles of the crater, they started hearing a roar like the ocean, and coming across to the rim of the crater, they see at the southwest end once again, same thing, right? Because people were coming up around here for the most part, and they see around here this fountain of fire, 150 feet broad, playing and separated by independent jets to the height of 150 to 300 feet. A really broad fountain, not extremely high, right? So you might imagine something along the lines of Ahuela'au, Picture 8. I don't know exactly at the early days how high exactly it was going, but the breadth and height of it was more of that shape rather than the spray of lava that's shooting in the air thousands and thousands of feet, like Kilauea, right? So a little bit different there. At night, this is a kind of Isabella bird here. At night, the lake was for the most part at white heat, and its surface was agitated with waves of white hot lava about the fountain at the center. Through the rest of the vast crater, the projecting ledges were thrown into bold relief by the reflected light, and by numerous dashes and lines of fire from apertures and crevices. Occasional detonations were heard, but no shakings except the tremors from the throw and fall of the lavas. At one time, the jets, after long playing at a height of 300 feet, suddenly became quite low, and for a few seconds there were cones of fire, wallowing in a sea of light. Then, with a roar like the sound of gathering waters, nearly the whole surface of the lake was lifted up by the action of some powerful internal force, and this whole radiant mass rose 3 times in one glorious upward burst to a height as estimated by the surrounding cliffs of 600 feet. After this, the fountain played as before. In one place, heavy white vapor blew off powerful jets from the edge of the lake, and elsewhere there were frequent jets and ebullitions of the same. But there was not a trace of vapor over the burning lake itself. After having seen lava lakes, we can visualize her description there, right? And she was arriving more around this time in June, when this whole bottom area is all covered in lava, right? And crusted over. With some forming crust, but she's seeing glow in a crack, and she's seeing lava at the edges, right? So you got to imagine maybe it had a similar look to what Kilauea looks like today, briefly. So her companion, Mr. Green, was there to confirm her account because it turns out not everyone trusted her descriptions. Maybe it had something to do with the fact that she was a woman scientist in those days, and that was groundbreaking and pioneering. In any case, people were suspicious. And it was good to have a second account there. And Mr. Green similarly says, 300 to 400 feet. He says, the form of the fountain would constantly vary, sometimes being in the shape of a low rounded dome, then perhaps forming a sort of spire in the center, with the fountain in the form of a wheat sheaf on each side. Sometimes it would look like one great wheat sheaf. On these days, the visible vapors of gas were quite insignificant, and by daylight we could see none. All right, so we're talking about there, the lava shooting up the lava lake, the lava fountain shooting up through the lava lake, and the waves coming from the edge of the lava there, right? And so that's really what's going on here. And let me show you guys. There's a panorama. These are the ways that it's documented back then. Oh. Panorama. You can see the panorama in black and white, and what it would have looked like here is view the southwest area with all the vents would have been in here, the lava lakes up in here, and then the broader flows out across the Caldera floor are in this other area over here. So a couple more things here. Reverend Titus Cone was a very important historian in Hawaii at that time. But, he notes in January 1873 that for 9 months, the action had not ceased. Its duration is marvelous, considering that it seems to be confined to the crater. A special brilliancy to it in January. Perhaps higher fountains, a larger open lake surface, that kind of thing, perhaps. He once again, October 6th, that year says it's continued for 18 months, and that's the account where the 18 months of action really comes from. So that's really the history of that lava lake as much as we know, and the accounts there. There are lots of other little footnotes, like we went up and saw a little bit of this, a little bit of that, but really no one's as eloquent as Isabella Bird there. I really wanted to share her account there. Isabella Bird here was one of the first woman elected to the Royal Scottish Geographic Society here, and you're honoring her with a post here 145 years later, right? And her voyages, Maunaloa was actually her second volcano. She went up to Kilauea first as her visit to Kilauea here. Another story for another day once again as well. But because I thought that showing you guys a black and white photograph and just reading accounts and showing you maps, because that's really all there is for these old accounts, that maybe we could show you a little bit of what happened afterwards right here. So now we're going to turn to USGS footage from Harold Stern's early on of Maunaloa erupting, and this is in the 1930s. So eruption begins in the summit. So this is you out of an airplane, and you can see a fissure in the summit here. And the caldera walls on the sides. And so the fissure is feeding flows that are filling the caldera floor as most eruptions begin on Mauna Loa. So that'll be the similar thing to expect someday, and we'll show you guys more modern footage someday as well. But they stick to this era, this old historical era. And you can see an old cinder cone right in here, and quite often new fissures would cut across the cinder cones as well. Some snow in the foreground at the time. And there are all kinds of eruptions of Mauna Loa. And essentially, because it is that closed crater, all the flows are if the eruption lasts long enough, you can form a lava pond or a little lava lake kind of feature, really, right? But really, a sustained lava lake like Kilauea had for 100 years, that's not something we have seen on Mauna Loa. It's been these shorter ones, the 18-month one being really the winner here. And we really can see the massive flux and volume of Mauna Loa flows here. And it's more recent sequence here. Some of the first color video ever taken of an erupting volcano here. Imagine if
Someone's asking what year that is.
This is in the 1930s. It's not specified exactly, and most likely 1935. So this is following what happens, and this is as far back as we can get. Yeah. Likely 1935, 1934, somewhere right in there. I believe 1935. A little shaky, that Mauna Loa there. And these eruptions in 35, and I'll show you guys a little bit of the 1942 eruption here shortly as well. These ones progressed down to the Northeast Rift after the summit phase. So I'm showing you guys just a summit phase as a proxy for what it might have looked like, right? Forming a cinder cone and lava pool in the middle, and then feeding big flows out to the side here, right? And you can see here this little bit of this crater edge still remaining on the southwest side here of Mokua Ve'oveo, summit crater of Mauna Loa. Really through those flows in the 1800s, second half of the 1800s, and that first half of the 1900s, refill all that collapse pit of the caldera and make it a much broader, flatter crater floor, which was what we began our broadcast today with that webcam view of that flat. Really didn't see many of those down-drop blocks in there anymore. It's mostly been filled in. We're coming around the south side here. The summit would be up over here on the left. And so very similar eruption site, even in the 1930s, as we had back in the 1870s. Really, that's that area that seemed to connect easiest for the magma to come up. So a little bit more, because I think you guys, if you guys are still with us, you endured the black and white in the maps here. So a little bit of 1942, similar. You can see a summit crater, fissures in the summit. Lava flowing very quickly, and in this case it appears to be going back into another crack within the caldera. Hard to tell exactly, and this did progress to a northeast rift zone eruption as well, so it could have been flowing out there to the northeast rift zone. So just a little bit of that footage so you can see the kind of fissures and fountains that were present for that eruption as well. And so we can come back to this. There's a lot more footage than these couple of little clips here, but this is the relevant thing to the summit. I wanted to show you guys like how massive these fountains can be here, the volume, and we generally consider Mauna Loa as being an order of magnitude bigger than Kilauea and what she does. So 2018 on Kilauea gave us a little window of what Mauna Loa would do normally. Kilauea did it exceptionally. All right, so let's wrap it up here with a couple final things. Let's show you guys a little sketch map here. This is from McDonald and Hubbard, Hawaii Nature Notes 51, and this is a map before the 75 and 84 eruptions, right? So this is showing us that in-between era, and what you see is no no southern bench anymore. Maybe a piece of it over here, a little bit left, right? You really don't see northern bench anymore. You really had lava flow of 1840. The 1840 cone is this one right here in the middle. It's buried by the black stuff later on, but 1840 flow. 1840 went on for a while as well. Right? Let's see, I want to say 164 days in total. It might have been 100 days or, I don't know, a few months at least of lava lakes in a similar area in there, or around here perhaps. It's not quite clear. It seems likely, right around in here, and feeding flows that filled much of that caldera floor. So, all through there.
We have a $30 super chat from our good friend Gary Bryan, who says, awesome historic descriptions and drawings. Asks if in the 1800s, what was the typical length of stay at the summit by observers?
It quite often was only 1 or 2 nights, because people often suffered altitude sickness and didn't have enough supplies. And it's amazing how vital a supply that brandy was at the time, right? Because you had to keep warm and keep yourself going. And there's an account of in fact the was it, I don't know if it was the Wilkes guys? No, it might have been. I forget which account I was reading now, right? But the guy comes up and it was Archibald Menezes, the first summit of Maunaloa, who actually had the help of Kamehameha, and went up there, and he was trying to figure out how tall the mountain was. They trying to figure out whether Mauna Loa or Mauna Kea was taller still back in those days, and his Hawaiian guides, he lost more and more of them the higher he got up the mountain he got, and the colder it got. And he asked people to wait, and he found out that some of them had not waited. In fact, one of his Western travel companies had not waited and took his brandy back down to camp, and they almost died on the spot. They were so disappointed. But after discovering that their guides had actually still had some coconuts, they cracked open the coconuts, drank the juice, ate the meat, and were able to manage to crawl back into camp downhill later on that night. So anyways, interesting stuff. Yeah. It was very hard to get up there. Later on, as the trails were better established and people used horses to get up there, it became easier and easier. But it was, it's by the 40s, you can say that when there was an eruption, all the park rangers would just drop what they were doing and just leave and start hiking up the mountain like it wasn't that big a deal. Right? But it was different back in the 1800s, still in the early days of Isabella Bird. Right, and there was another. In fact, it was Douglas, right? David Douglas, who's a famous botanist, right? The Douglas pine. The Douglas fir, yeah.
Right.
Who,
right.
Also met his end in Hawaii. Went up there and apparently was hallucinating by some of the stuff he was writing, and just confused himself. And I won't go into all of that, but altitude sickness was a real thing, and that was really what was the limiting factor for how long they could stay up there.
All right. Well, thank you, Gary, for the super chat, and back to you.
All right. So yeah, you can see the lava flow of 1949 is the black thing here, and it not only filled a lot of the remaining lower parts of this inner caldera, it also filled South Pit, reached that edge, spilled out over the edge, the southeast, and that was after initially earlier on having a fissure that actually breached across. The fissure actually went across the 1940 cone, across the caldera rim, and out of the caldera. So we had a southwest rift flow early on, but because the weakest spot was an intersection of the caldera wall and a fissure, that became the focus of the eruption. So 1940 and 1949, all here in the southwest part of the caldera is where a lot of those were coming up. So the point is, if you look on this map here, there's nothing that says 1870 anywhere. It's just not on here. Everything was buried by all this later activity. And even farther north, you just don't see any of that. Right? You can see on here, Lua Poholo. This is the new pit crater that formed around 1880 or so. That wasn't on our sketches that we were looking at. So a lot of stuff's changing around here. And so, okay, another map. You guys put up with another map. So one last one here. Most recent one actually shows 1984 filling most of the caldera floor here. That's the newest stuff. There was 75 before that, but also mostly all the way covered by 84. So on our historical map of Mauna Loa lava flows, there's a lot of stuff that we don't see, especially in the caldera. That early caldera filling action just doesn't show up in the flows anywhere. That's why I want to just, for once, to focus on maybe that action within the summit there. So what does it look like now? Here's a view from the USGS looking from that, similar at that camp spot, right? And this is a 1940 cone right here in the middle. What's left of it, but it's surrounded by well, first it was 1949 lava, but by the time this photograph is taken, all of 1984 stuff has come and covered most of it as well. And we just get a view of this higher. This is the summit up here, probably up here actually. So you see this high western rim of the caldera, and off to the side over here, it would be the 1949 cone that straddles the rim over here, 40 right through here. So, and actually, if we look at this 1940, right in there, that's a little perched lava pond right in there. You can see it still. They're not huge things in Mauna Loa, right? Especially with those early eruptions. But if you look at the 1949 and 1940, those are the next two candidates for largest lava lake in Mauna Loa caldera in known history. And really, it's the nature of any eruption in a crater filling that hole is going to make a big flow and start ponding up, and eventually it can pool to form a lava pond, if not a little lava lake. So it's really about how long can you have some activity and at what volume. And that, in the end, is what sets that 1872 era, 1873-74 era apart from what comes since then. And I'll show you guys a few more photographs here. So this is back from 2019, a Civil Air Patrol flight over Mauna Loa. So this is now looking from the northeast back to the southwest. So this is that new pit crater from 1880 here in the foreground. You see Mauna Loa 1984 fissures all through here. It's all 84 lava filling the crater. Here is that western high rim, the summit being up in here, right in there, right? Here's the connection right in here into this north pit, isthmus right in there. I pan it left a little bit, but maybe I can't quite see from this angle. So let's just keep scrolling down. A view from the south here. So tag off of there. Here's the summit up here on the far side, and this low southeast side of it, lower, and is actually cutting off these darker lava flows. And these are the flows that are somewhere in a range of 1,000 years old, more or less. You know, I've seen some older dates of 600 years old or so. So probably some work happening there. We'll cover that caldera timing some other time. But this is the sequence overflows from the south side that have been truncated by this caldera that are dating the caldera at around 1,000 years or so. Right in there. Oh, and yeah, and actually I forgot to come back to this because I scroll it down. Here at the bottom, there's a little cross section, and it's showing lava fill since 1841 here, and how we had these blocks that were elevated before. And since 1841, we've come and we've actually repaved, filled in all that collapse feature. This is not unlike what we've talked about for Kilauea historically. One interesting, just little curiosity of note here is that not only is this northwest side higher, right? There's only a single caldera fault known over there, whereas on the east side it's lower caldera fault, but there's a second one further out, all the way out here. So if we look on map view, the main Mokuaweo'oweo summit crater is this one right in here. But there is an outer, perhaps, greater caldera that is more asymmetric to the southeast, which is interesting as well, right? Because we know the southeast flank is a big component in how Mauna Loa grows and builds. Oh, back to the photographs here. That was a view from the south. And this is looking from the northeast rift here, so you can see some vents here in the northeast rift, fissure lines and cones and eruptive foci, right? And from this angle, you really can see how it's taller on this northwest side and lower on the southeast side right in here. Very easily visible in this photograph here. Okay, and that's the images we have of Mauna Loa for you guys today. We will turn to some questions here after just reminding you guys to check out hawaiitracker.com, where we try to post a lot of the other in-between stuff on Kilauea as well. All right, Dane.
Right. So yeah, thank everybody that showed up. If you enjoyed this content, make sure to like, subscribe, share this. Really helps the channel grow. Maybe consider becoming a user on hawaiitracker.com. We do all kinds of our video releases and everything we kind of put in there, so it's all in chronological order for you. And if you like to make a monetary donation, we take those on hawaiitracker.com/support. Every little bit helps, and we appreciate everybody that's here. All right, so let's get into some questions just right away then. Don't have many today, but one of the questions is about what you were talking about earlier. Christina asks, how can a fissure eruption happen inside of a lava lake?
So it's the fissure eruption is the fissure is what happens first. So the sequence of eruptions in Hawaii is that you have pressure building up, and it's going to come up and break through the ground, and the ground breaks in long cracks, and those cracks, when lava comes out of the whole length of the crack, that's what a fissure is. And because it's hard to sustain lava coming out of a 2-mile or longer crack in the ground for a long time, often wherever the weakest part of it is, or where the easiest path out is, will become the focus of that eruption. So you switch from having a whole line of fissures to having one bigger dominant fissure location, right? That forms the vent, that forms like a cone around it quite often, right? So they're localizing in one spot, and then they're basically piling, essentially, like, if you have the same volume coming out, but it's coming out of a smaller area, then you've basically shrunk the nozzle, and so you can start shooting it out with more volume from that one spot. And now you can start pooling it and sending big flows out in the area and puddling it around that hole. And then when you have a fountain coming up, it can fountain up through the lava lake in that one area. Whereas other areas have been covered by lava, more recent flows, and likely were inactive in the early part of that eruption as a focus to one spot. So good question there.
Yeah, makes sense. So Matthew has kind of a similar along the lines question, but what is the time scale for Caldera formation? Is it more of a rapid collapse or sudden, slower subsidence?
Yeah, that's another great question, because we do see evidence of some subsidence in between eruptions that does move a lot of those blocks, and so it's a little bit of both, right? We don't know as much about the fast time scale from Maunaloa because we didn't see that. But using Kilauea as an analog, we know that fast collapses can happen. Fast geologically, I'm not saying it went all down 1,600 feet in one day. It took it 3 months to do that. But still, 10 feet a day is pretty fast geologically. Pretty crazy to have lived through that, right? That was like,
yeah,
so
for sure.
So you probably have episodes of faster stuff, and then you also have some in between remobilization of those collapse features from subsidence from every other eruption afterwards, potentially.
Makes sense. Next one is from JW on YouTube. Asks, are any of the Mauna Loa fumaroles accessible from the trails?
I believe there are, but it's been a while, and I will have to defer. I really don't know. I remember when I was up there, there were some accessible, but I didn't necessarily only stick to the summit trail. So
right,
a little hazy in my mind exactly. Yeah, but it's fantastic landscape up there, and maybe we can bring more coverage of the features that are up there at some point in time.
Right. So Christina Christina from Facebook asks about the VOG from Mauna Loa. Do you think
Mhm.
it'll be trapped in Kona or anything or something different? I did manage to pull a source on this one, Volcano Watch from 2009, that and it said that in 1984 the inversion layer was below the summit, so or all the bog was getting caught above the inversion layer. So there were no reports of bog in Kona. I was wondering if you had heard anything further than that, or what your thoughts on the bog would be in a future eruption.
Yeah, that's a great point, right? And if you have a summit eruption, right, that's the summit is up there. So depending on whether you're in the time of year and you have a good chance of having an inversion layer, the summit may well be up there. Mauna Loa 84, northeast rift zone, fairly high up as well, but you might have had a lower inversion layer during that shorter period of time for that to be the case, right? It certainly
Right.
could be the case. There are reports during some of these fountaining events of people finding Pele's hair in South Kona and in Hilo. Right? People in
Mm,
Hilo finding Pele's hairs on their vegetables from Mauna Loa high fountains.
wow.
So it can go both ways, I think.
Yeah, definitely. One thing about Mauna Loa, when it does go up, like everybody around the island's going to know about it. It's not going to be like Kilauea where you can only see it from Puna or Ka'u. It's going to be everybody knows what's happening. That glow is going to be mean. Um, so final one. Okay, we're gonna do two. One simple one. How old roughly is Mauna Loa? Just ballparking.
Ballpark million, yeah, very
Million.
roughly. Yeah.
Very rough. Okay. And then what are the types of volcanic monitoring that are being used on Mauna Loa? And does the other monitoring stations, say in Iceland and other volcanoes, use similar metrics?
Yeah, so the things that are being used are a lot of the same things as Kilauea. So we do have a lot of seismometers. It's a big area, so there's a lot of seismometers, a lot more in total than Kilauea because it's a bigger place you got to cover, right? You do use GPS as well. You use tilt meters. You use gas
Mm,
monitors, webcams as well.
yep.
Um, Recently, the use of satellite data has been much more important, right? So INSAR and Mauna Loa, we're still waiting for some more information. Recent INSAR at some point to tell us what's happening in the volcano as a whole, as a large area, right? The benefit of INSAR is you get that complete coverage of everywhere that's not vegetated, but the downside is you only get it for intervals of when a satellite flies over. So you don't get to do it every 15 minutes, for example. You only get it once a week at most. Right? Get a good pass. Right. So yeah, those are similar things that are being used in Iceland as well. That's pretty standard stuff, right? There's a lot of more novel stuff that you could use, like um, lidar and laser mapping, and we use yeah, it's hard to go through everything off the top of my head, right? We use gravity. There's all different kinds of seismic techniques, looking at different kinds of seismicity, and whether it's where it's happening in a spatial pattern, or the fault plane solutions, or the anisotropy. I mean, there's all kinds of ways to
Well,
slice
yeah.
that, right?
Right.
So, but that's the basics of it. That's the basics of it there. The
Yeah, I
thermal
think
camera is
you said
important
well.
as well. That's up
Yeah.
there too.
You don't overly rely on any one piece. You kind of always look to get collaborating evidence of anything that's happening from different monitoring stations. So just because you have the tilt meter going, you start looking at the GPS, seismic, and you make deductions that way. There's a few that kind of are important on their own, like SO2. You start getting a bunch of SO2, emissions.
Hmm.
Kind of stands on its own right there. But yeah, it's interesting. Wanted to follow up. Christina was saying that in 1950 eruption, her friend from Oahu could see it from the flow from Hawaii Kai,
Wow.
the glow. So yeah, and I remember in World War II they were talking about Mauna Loa erupted and concerned that it would act as a beacon for the Japanese. That didn't happen, but that was one of the concerns is, Mauna Loa is just going to act as this giant beacon in the Pacific. And it technically would,
Yeah, there was an earlier. I don't know if it was the 70. No, I think it was a different eruption from Maui. People on Maui saw it and they thought the cane fields were on fire.
Right.
Or not, it was Mauna Loa, one island away, glowing extremely brightly in the sky. Right. And they were all just flabbergasted that there wasn't fire on their own island.
It's one of the things I saw in 2018 was just how much when the clouds got low and the gas got trapped, just how much glow it would increase. Like it would turn everything just bright red. Like the lawn, everything was just this hardcore red glow. It was spooky. Right. But I think that does it for our questions for today. We are going to be premiering another part of the Drones On series on May 28th of the eruption after this live concludes. So I hope to see you guys there. Still not too long. Try and get to the point pretty quickly and take you into the rebirth of Fissure 8, Ahuaila'au, in the heart and in the heat of the 2018 eruption. So I hope to see you guys there for that. And that will premiere after this concludes. Back to you, Phil.
Right on. It's going to premiere on YouTube, yeah?
Yep, premiere on YouTube.
On YouTube. All right, you guys. So mahalo for joining us today. We'll come back to you guys with information on Kilauea on Tuesday. And we'll keep an eye on Mauna Loa as usual here. And thank you guys for all your support. Thanks for your questions. And we will see you next week. So for Hawaii Tracker, I'm Dane DuPont. I'm Philip Ong.